Dr. Megan Marie DeLegas, physical therapist here and wellness coach. I'm going to go over one of the main categories of movements that you'll see in a strength program by me or a quality trainer or any sort of strength and conditioning coach or physical therapist. The first one here is going to be the squat. I'm going to go over the general concept of what it is, some different variations, and some of the goals or things that we're looking for within it. Okay, so the first one is the squat. I'll show you a traditional body weight squat, which is in the side view. I'm putting my arms forward just as a visual for you. Coming down, hips, the crease is below the knee, and the toes are behind the knee, meaning the knee travels over the toes. About 4 inches is the ideal. It varies depending on someone's anatomy, so I wouldn't stress on that number. And the other things that we're mainly focusing on besides the knee, hip crease, ankle is that our feet are flat, meaning our heels are not coming off the floor, and that our backs are neutral. So nothing rounded, and then not overly arched, so something in the middle, okay? In the ideal world, we would have our arms overhead really comfortably. It's quite challenging for many people to start with that, but it can be worked towards. Okay, so what I tell people is the most important part is that our feet are flat and our backs are neutral. So if that means you can only go a certain depth before your heels raise or that your back starts to round, then what you want to do is just go as far down as that cutoff is. Say it's here, then you're not going to go much lower, otherwise the integrity of the movement is going to go down. So it's not necessarily that it's dangerous, but there are goals with the squat that are very functional, which is really good quality range of motion and appropriate body awareness. And so if we can't maintain the ideal goal or posture, then we want to really work on refining it within where it is ideal. So if you have to stop midway through, that's fine. If you have to put a bench beneath your butt so you're only working within that range, that's fine. That's the goal, and you work your way down over time. And there are many ways to work your way down to a more ideal squat, but that takes time. It might need some coaching. That's where I come in and can help you and guide you to get there. So other little mini things that can help is foot positioning here. So many people always want to know, is it parallel? Is it really wide? What is the right thing? The first thing I'll tell people is that our anatomy is different, meaning someone else's parallel will work really well, whereas someone else's wide foot will work really well. Plus our femurs and our shins or our tibias are all different lengths, so there really isn't one standard, so that notion that there is incorrect. So for you, it's going to be a matter of what feels right on top of what's going to get you a decent quality squat with good range of motion and good neutral back and heels down. You may have to adjust, but I like to start people on at least hip width apart in the heels, about hip width, maybe smidge wider, and then the toes turned out about 30 degrees from parallel, and then starting with that, okay? The next thing is making sure that the knees are tracking outward over the middle toes. Oftentimes, people will come collapsing in, and their squat will end up being quite rounded, or their heels will raise as an effect of being more internally rotated. So what we want to do is externally rotate and have our knees track over the toes. So you can see they're right in line, okay? If you can't get your knees to track over by really driving out, then you might have to bring your toes in a tiny bit, okay? But the idea is really stay tracking in that line, okay? And if you have to, like I said, from an anatomical perspective, an adjustment perspective to get nice and low, if you have to adjust your feet to do so, that is fine. If you need help with that, shoot me a video of you doing it from the front and a video from the side, and I can help guide you accordingly. Okay, so those are the main points of a squat. I'll show you just some variations of them so you have an idea of how the squat is a general concept, a general movement, and how it can be adjusted into different types of sub-squat categories, okay? So I will show you for an example is, I just showed you body weight squats. This is a kettlebell. This would be a goblet squat, so you're imagining it holding like a goblet, and you're holding it by your sternum. A goblet squat is gonna set your weight a bit more forward. So usually people can get a bit forward in their knees, especially if they have tight calves and a bit restricted ankles. That will naturally set you a bit more forward. And the way that the weight sets you forward also generally can allow us to get a bit deeper in our squats than if we didn't have it, okay? So that's a goblet squat. And you can see how where we put our weight or our weights can affect the type of depth that we get and how we can work towards certain ranges of motion. So that, again, that's where I come in if you're struggling to get an ideal squat. Okay, so that's one example. Well, two, we had body weight squats, we had a kettlebell goblet squat. Then we have a sumo squat, which is a wider leg position. It's gonna open up the inner groin of the hips. And I usually incorporate those, especially when people are working on improving either some variation of a split or getting more flexibility through here. You go a little bit wider in your stance, so meaning wider than your hip, and your toes turn out even more than in the original squat. And the same thing applies though in terms of the knee. It must track over the toes. So if you feel like you can't get them out, if you're really trying and you can't, then your foot position has to change a little bit to get there. Okay, so now you're really wide here. Some will get even wider and get nice and low. So that will also improve range of motion in an abducted way. So there's points and there's ways we can apply these movements to improve specific goals to a person's mobility, flexibility, or strength. Okay, so that's a sumo squat, really wide. Okay, that's just an example, another example. And then we've got the split squat. This is sometimes in its own category. I lump it in as a variation of a squat, just in a different stance position. So a double leg regular squat is here. A split squat is where your legs are split in either width or front to back, usually front to back, okay? So a split squat is an example of a squat variation. It's gonna target more single leg strength, a little bit more range of motion through the front and back angles of the hip simultaneously. And with that, we really want to bring the heels forward and make sure everything is in a essentially 90-degree angle through the legs. Unless we have other goals where I want you to tilt forward, it's going to target different muscles. But you can see how things apply differently depending on the goal. Okay, so that's a split squat. And then the last one is, I like to give people the option of using things like walls as their cue, especially if they can't get the full range of motion, is mini squats or wall squats or squats to a table or low bench, especially as you're working on the control of keeping a neutral back and not letting your heels rise, okay? So there's variations in which we can work with somebody and what their starting point is and work them towards specific goals, whether it's range of motion, strength, or flexibility. Okay, so that's an example, a little bit of information about the squat category itself. And this is a great little video to reference when you're trying to remember what the difference is between a squat and maybe something else, okay? I suppose the last little detail with the squat is just knowing that the angles in the squat tend to happen to be more of a knee dominant exercise. So we're gonna target a lot of the muscles and that surround the knee joint. You're also gonna get into the glutes and the hips as well with a squat. The way the movement happens is they move fairly together, so the angle that happens through the hip kind of is similar and pretty equal as the knee joint itself. It's not always the same. Sometimes you'll see a bit more of a hingy squat, and sometimes you'll see, which you'll see in another video, some hinges that are a bit more squatty in appearance. So there's an overlap that happens between squats and other movements in the hinge category. Hopefully that was helpful for you guys. Shoot me a message if you have questions or email me, and you can always send me videos for analysis and seeing where you could be focusing your efforts if you have specific goals.